Welcome back to the PI Files. Today we're privileged to have attorney Richard Ingle with us. Richard is a seasoned attorney with a unique dual focus on elder abuse and business law. With an extensive experience in advocating for the rights of the vulnerable, seniors, and tackling cases involving neglect, abuse, and financial exploitation. He has been a relentless champion for justice. But that's not all. Richard also brings expertise in business law, helping companies navigate complex legal issues, structure contracts, and resolve disputes effectively. This combination of skills allows him to offer a holistic approach to legal challenges that touch both families and businesses. Today, Richard will share insights into protecting the elderly from abuse and the legal challenges businesses face. Let's give a warm welcome to Richard as we dive into this important conversation. Thanks, Richard, for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You know, I want to kick it off. I've never met anybody that handles both elder abuse and business. How did that come about?
Well, I started in elder abuse, and then over time, I represented a lot of businesses that were defending elder abuse cases. And so you start to learn about business structures, you start to learn about contracts, you start to get involved in employment matters. And so then when I went on my own, that was just a natural progression. And over time, I'd say the firm represents probably about 70% of the cases are business, about 20 to 30% are elder abuse and other civil litigation matters.
What's been your journey to start? What got you into being an attorney to begin with?
Well, I started out in finance and I wanted to go into business law from the beginning. And so I went to law school. After law school, when I graduated, a lot of the firms were laying off transactional attorneys. And that's initially what I wanted to do. But in law school, I ended up on the moot court competition, which is more courtroom and oral advocacy as opposed to sitting behind a desk just writing contracts. And it was just a natural progression. So I ended up with a litigation position, and here I am 20 years later, still doing it.
Got it. Is there any, we're going to dive into so many different topics, but is there anything that you gravitate toward? Do you love one or the other, or do you love them equally, or what in terms of what you handle?
I love advocating for people who are being wrong. And that in the elder abuse context, most of the time, that's the plaintiff. Most of the time, it's an elder nursing home, which could be a skilled nursing facility. There's also RCFEs, which a lot of people will refer to as convalescent homes. They don't have the skilled nursing level. And so when those people aren't being taken care of by healthcare providers making millions and billions of dollars a year, that's passion. And I think whatever you do for work, you got to have passion. And it's the same with businesses. Businesses have a lot of regulatory standards, a lot of requirements for employers, employees, and they need to meet those, right? And that's a difficult landscape. There's partnerships, and usually friends go into a partnership, but they don't understand that a partnership is a marriage, and marriages are tough. And they're really not tough when you say I do. They're tough 5, 6, 10 years later. And that's the same with businesses. You go into business and you have a partnership, and maybe you have the money, you have the friends, and you get in, you have this great idea, you start making money. Down the road, it's a marriage, right? And so people need lawyers to come in, hopefully set them up from the beginning, but if they didn't set them up from the beginning, try to resolve those disputes on the back end. And then, of course, there's the relationships that businesses have with other businesses, vendors, contract employees, regular employees, staff coming in and out, board of directors changing in and out. Sometimes a business grows and they need to create multiple business structures. So it's a very complex landscape to run a business, and most business owners don't understand that until they're well on their way. And so that's kind of fun too, because you're actually helping create things, right? Where in the elder abuse realm, you're really holding somebody accountable. Most of the time in the business context, you're either creating or resolving disputes and helping people move forward. So it's interesting, it's fun, it's helpful, and wouldn't change the profession.
I definitely want to dive into both. So starting with elder abuse, what are the most common cases you're seeing? And is there any particular case that stands out for you?
Sure. The cases in elder abuse, a lot of them are skilled nursing facilities. And if you talk to any good elder abuse attorney, there's going to tell you there's some very common things that happen in nursing homes. After the elder checks in, the family goes home. And they're in a skilled nursing facility because they need help. They're not in a skilled nursing facility because they're running a race in the Olympics, right? Those days are over. Now they're older and they need help. And so what we see in skilled nursing facilities is we have elders suffering falls, medication errors, elders that are particularly compromised, meaning that they're bedbound. They can't even turn and reposition themselves. Now, someone like me and you, it's hard to imagine that we can't roll over in bed at night. Sometimes I think maybe I wish I didn't. I could just sleep. But these elders are very sick and they're laying in one position at the entire time they're there. Maybe they're there for a hip replacement or some other type of surgery. They rely on the staff to turn and reposition. So now you have bed sores, right? So you have these very common problems that happen in nursing homes repeatedly. A lot of those shouldn't happen. And so these falls turn into head injuries, sometimes called subdural hematomas, just bleeding on the brain, and they die. Bed sores, until a family calls me, people don't understand that bed sores aren't just a blister. Bed sores kill patients in America every single day. Medication errors, most commonly, usually it's with diabetes where they're not giving insulin in a timely manner, or they're giving the wrong drug, or they're giving too much of like a psychotropic medication, which causes a patient to be lethargic, not want to drink water, not want to eat, and what does that cause? Malnutrition, dehydration. So those are kind of the top things that clients call me with, right? We have falls, medication errors, dehydration, malnutrition, and bed sores, also known as decubitus ulcers.
So when are you getting advised of this? Maybe a family member notices this and then they're seeking, or somebody passes away due to these things? Or?
Yeah, unfortunately, I usually see it on the backside. Unfortunately, I usually see it because loved ones are very frustrated with the facility that made all these promises on the front end. And then throughout the duration of the residency, things didn't go quite as promised. And so I don't see it till the back end. Every once in a while, fortunately, I get phone calls from families or friend members that know that I do this. And then I can help immediately. I had a recent family member, or a close, like a second family, who fell and suffered a subdural hematoma outside in a parking lot. Mm-hmm. Well, I was able to get involved at the hospital level and at the skilled nursing level, and he actually came home and recovered. But the things that went on in the hospital and the outrageous things that went on in the skilled nursing facility, if I wasn't there, I can almost guarantee he would not have come home.
When you look at are the police involved at all in this?
The police I usually don't see the police involved in the neglect cases. And that's, like I said, usually that's happening after the death. Mm-hmm. There is a criminal element to the Elder Abuse Act, but I usually don't get involved in it. Usually, if I'm involved in any way, it's usually with the FBI on a financial elder abuse claim.
Can you give me an example of that? Have you done that?
Sure. And usually my involvement is peripheral. I don't even take the case.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, not too long ago, I got a phone call from a son whose dad, he wasn't in close communication with his dad. And his dad ended up with these scam phone calls. And they said, hey, your son is in prison. And the dad's demented. He doesn't know how to get a hold of the son. You need to go to this bank and wire money. So he goes to his branch and he wires hundreds of thousands of dollars over time. But the scammers are really smart. The elder isn't quite there. He's not demented enough to be conserved or to have someone there, but he's fearful of his son. He's elderly. He's 90 years old. Then they have him go to a second branch or a third branch. That way you don't just have one branch making these wires. And so it ended up being almost $900,000 that this person transferred. And the FBI got involved, and then I got involved because I was an attorney that they were trying to take on this elder abuse case. And unfortunately, you can't recover that money. So that's where I get involved, both with the criminal and the civil. But involved doesn't mean taking on the case, right? I take on only civil cases.
Going back to the stuff that happens at these homes, what's the root of the problem? I mean, I believe there's probably a real estate play with the owners. Perhaps are they getting like some sort of tax break, but then maybe they're hiring less skilled people? Why would these things occur?
There's lots of roots to the problem, and it really is dependent on the facility. So there are a lot of facilities doing a great job out there. Let's be honest, right? We need it. We need skilled nursing facilities. We need our CFEs. People like you and I, we're working all day, every day. We can't just care for an elder, and caring for someone who's demented is even tougher. However, a lot of these facilities, what I see happening is it's related to staffing. It's either they're understaffing to increase the profits, which is pretty disgusting, or they're hiring staff and not holding that staff accountable, and the staff aren't doing their job. So the staff are not paying attention to what they should be paying attention to. Instead, they're having, birthday parties at 2 a.m. in a lunchroom, right? And how do I do that? Well, I defended cases for a long time, right? So I was doing those interviews, and you walk in and where's the staff for the interview? So I've seen it personally, right? From a plaintiff's perspective, the same thing. The families will go in and they'll make these requests of the staff members. Hey, my mom's not drinking water. Why is my mom or dad in a dirty diaper? I was here at lunch and they're in the same diaper. And so a lot of the times the family members are witnesses to what's going on in these facilities. And so I would say that it's either understaffing or it's not training or holding the staff accountable to do the jobs that they're hired to do during, throughout the duration of a particular resident stay.
Yeah, we get brought in on these cases to locate people and backgrounds and all this stuff. And you see some of the owners will have multiple LLCs and obviously they don't care. They just want that money. And
there's a shell game that they play.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a little bit of the interplay in why it was so easy to start transitioning into the corporate law, because you really, if you're going to be either a defense attorney, is where I started my career, or as a plaintiff, you have to understand those structures, because they do create shells. Everybody's heard of the shell game. They play it at the highest level. And so you have to understand how this happens. But like I said, I think there's good and there's bad. I don't drink the Kool-Aid on either side, right? I've defended some great owners. I've defended some not so great owners. And I've prosecuted a lot of not so great owners, right? And so really you need to look at it, I think, on a case-by-case basis.
So from beginning to end, when you say you prosecuted some of these owners, do you have a success story that sticks out in your mind?
Well, I think one of the successes for me was the one where I didn't even get paid. So I've closed down 2 RCFEs in Orange County, right? And that's a great success, because an RCFE is a residential care facility for the elderly. It's kind of a level down from your skilled nursing. And both of those situations were situations where the facility's underfunded, the facility's understaffed, the owners are skimming all the money off the top, right? They're driving the fancy cars. cars, they're living in the fancy houses. And unfortunately, there's no money. And so at the end of the day, they close down, and that feels good. It's not always about the money. And when you take those bad elements out of that healthcare environment, that's to me, full satisfaction.
Yeah. Are there any tips that you would have for, a family that's looking to place, their relative into a home, just to give them peace of mind, or what should they look for? Is there any sort of thing that you've seen, any sort of behavior or indicators where they shouldn't be bringing their family members to a home? Is there something that they can take away?
Sure. Nowadays with Google, they can do searches, and there's reviews online, both from a state level, a federal level, and then just your common reviews that everybody reads daily on restaurants and all kinds of things. So I would start there to make sure that I had at least a good baseline of what others are saying about the facility, whether the others are regulatory agencies or individuals like you and I. After that, you want to do a tour. And then you want to be very, very attentive to what they're saying, but you want to be more attentive to what you're seeing, because the people bringing these elders in, right, they're just like anybody else. They're selling a bed, right? They're selling a room. And you want to make sure that what they're selling is true, right? If you're shopping for a new car, you want to make sure it's new and not used, right? You want to use your eyes, maybe even a little more than your ears, right? And then once they're there, regardless of whether you think the facility is a 1-star facility or a 5-star facility, you have to be attentive to your loved one. You have to watch for changes in their physical or mental condition, and you have to stay on the staff. And when the staff says they're going to do something and they don't do it, you need to ride them harder. And that's, like I said, just recently, I think it was maybe 6 months ago during that personal situation, that's exactly what I did, right? I stayed on them until the work they said was going to be done was done. Because a lot of times family members that come to me in cases that I've handled over 20 years, well, they promised this and they promised that, and family members it's an odd thing. They love their family member, but they defer to the facility. Don't defer your loved one to the facility. Listen, yes, but if you see something's going wrong, you need to stay on them. You can't let up.
Yeah, I always tell people, when we get these long-term cases, nobody's going to care about your case as much as you. Whether, the police, an investigator, an attorney, you're the one that's going to care the most about it. Nobody's going to care about your family member as much as you. And if you see some of these signs, they need to start a chronological log. And you and I have handled a lot of long-term cases where that's extremely helpful, with evidence, with statements, with witnesses, all of it. And they need to be diligent. But you made a great point where sometimes they'll, well, I'm busy. I'm going to I trust that this is, pay attention. Is there anything else legally that you would recommend, like a trust or power of attorney, or keeping things in order, during that situation or prior to?
All those things need to be in place. Hands down. People, for some reason, they avoid creating a trust, right? I don't care if you're 30, 40, 50, or 80. Get a trust in place. Get a power of attorney in place. Get a healthcare power of attorney in place. Get the documents in place that are going to give you the power, unquestionable, about two things. One, you have the power to instruct healthcare providers to do what you believe needs to be done for the loved one. And almost as important is that the elder has somebody already in writing, in place, to take care of them if they do, let's say, have a fall at home and become incapacitated, or they have a stroke. Because there's also a lot of caregivers out there that I've experienced over the years. These people will just sweep in. They'll see an elderly person living on their own. All of a sudden, this lady is living with your dad or living with your mom. And then you come to find out they executed a durable power of attorney, or they executed a healthcare power of attorney, or worse, they created a trust. And now what? Now you have to work backwards, right? You have to show an undue influence. You have to show that the loved one maybe didn't have the mental capacity, because the courts don't hold other people responsible for the elder's stupid decisions. Adults make dumb decisions all the time. The courts don't provide a remedy for that. The courts provide a remedy for undue influence, for someone taking advantage of another person, someone harming another person. But just making stupid decisions, right? No one's going to jail because you wasted all your money on a Ferrari and got kicked out of your house. That's your problem, right? And so, but by having these documents in place, now what would have to happen is possibly the trust attorney is now looking at, well, why is this changing from the son and daughter to a strange, unrelated person, right? So you start to have these little stopgaps where it causes people to pause, causes people to question. And not only that, but you have people who can step in right away if something happens and you don't have a hole. Because people come to me, I don't do trust and estates. I refer that business out. That's not what I do. I do litigation. And I can't tell you how many clients come to me that don't have a trust in place, that don't have a durable power of attorney in place. Maybe a conservatorship is appropriate. They don't have a conservator. So now I have, 5 family members fighting. Everybody wants something different, and that's a problem. And that's only if the elder's alive. If the elder has passed away, well, all those documents really cease. You don't have those powers, die with the decedent.
We get the calls for a lot of money grabs, maybe a person that's entered the person's life, whether they're elderly or not, and then the family's out of town, and then the person, they're taking advantage of that person's money or the family's money, and it just begins to be a whole mess.
It happens all the time.
Yeah, you need to have
people would be I think people are very surprised when it happens. People like me and you, we see it, and we try to warn. People don't listen.
Yeah, until something happens.
And then you have to, right, then you have expensive litigation that you got to go through, right? The civil litigation process is a pretty brutal process, right? They got to go through depositions. They have to relive just about everything. And worse than that, they're there because their loved one's not, right? And I think everybody would rather have their loved one here and not have to litigate a case. I don't think I've ever met a family member who says, thank God they're dead and I made $1 million, right? They'd rather have the loved one here than to chase money.
Yeah, and if you don't have a plan, the state where you're living will have a plan for you.
California will have a plan for you, and an attorney will help you go through that process and take a certain portion of it. It's expensive, so why not have a plan in place, and then you don't have to worry about it. Right? It's like insurance on a car.
Yeah.
If you have insurance in a car and you get in a car accident, hey, everything's settled. Talk to someone who was in an accident that didn't have insurance. Let me know how it goes.
Yeah.
Right? It's not pleasant. Even if someone doesn't sue you, right now you don't have a car, because if you don't have insurance, you probably didn't have enough money to go out and pay $60,000 for a new car. Right? So now you don't have a car. Now you have work problems. You have school, kids in school problems. And then if the other person does sue you, now you have potential property problems, right? Because they're going to get judgments, and it just becomes a complete mess. Yeah. And people understand that because they drive their car every day. People don't understand the trust, the durable power of attorney, and the healthcare power of attorney. They just don't understand it until, unfortunately, it's too late.
Moving on to the business side of things of what you do, what are the most common legal mistakes entrepreneurs make when they start a business?
They start a business without a lawyer. And the reason they do it is because they don't have the money. Think about maybe when you started your business or when I started my business. A lot of people, when they start businesses, unless they have a wealthy family or some benefactor, they're on shoestring budget. The last thing they want to do is hire an attorney. So I'd say the biggest mistake they make is they don't set up a business entity correctly. They don't articulate the relationships of the partners clearly and correctly. And down the road, that costs them. It costs them a lot, right? I go through a dissolution. I've done many dissolutions of businesses because partners are in dispute. It's a lot of money. You have experts, right? You have to have business evaluations. It's very complex. You have lawyer fees, you have costs, right? All of that, or a lot of that, could have either been mitigated or avoided altogether if you define the relationship up front. Yeah. So I'd say that's the biggest mistake they make, but there's a reason for it. Most people who are entrepreneurs, they're entrepreneurs because they like to take risks, and they take the risks and they don't understand what happens on the backside. They're not looking where they're going, right? They're seeing where they're at and what they want to do, and they get excited, and they don't look kind of down the road. Going back to marriage, very similar, right? Some people, they jump into a marriage, and they're like, oh, this is wonderful. Well, they didn't really think it through, right? If your husband or wife was a drug addict before you got married, probably going to get worse on the back end, right? But they get blinded by the excitement, and then they pay the price down the road. And it's exactly the same with it.
What do you think every small business owner should know about drafting and signing contracts?
One is to read them. Can't tell you how many times I represent businesses or business owners, and they haven't read them. So first thing you want to do is read them. If you don't want to hire an attorney, at least read them. And then the second thing is hire an attorney, at least just to consult on the contract, because our experience and our training can help quite a bit. It's not going to avoid everything. There's no guarantees. Anybody can sue anybody at any time, but you can really mitigate or protect yourself and really articulate what you want the relationship to be, because a contract is a relationship, right? It's a bargain between party A, party B in a simple contract. And it's, this is what I want and this is what you want. Well, what happens if one person doesn't perform? Do you think about that in the contract? What happens if it's a relatively small contract that could have a big impact on your business, but you don't have attorney fees and costs in the contract? In California, the recovery of damages for contract don't include attorney fees and costs unless it's in the contract. Now, there are exceptions to that, like fraud, but people don't think about those things. So now they have a contract, maybe the contract's worth $20,000, but they're going to jump into this huge litigation. It's going to cost them more than $20,000, right? So, having a lawyer at least consult just on the contract, I think would be helpful. And reading it really would be the first step. A lot of people, they just sign and they don't think there's going to be consequences. And sometimes those consequences are pretty ruthless.
Is there anything that businesses can do to protect their intellectual property, or maybe what are the risks for not doing that?
Sure. So intellectual property attorneys usually are intellectual property attorneys. I don't deal a lot with that, but I do deal with trade secrets, confidential, proprietary information, and again, protected up front, right? So I've had probably 3 cases in the last year regarding customer lists. So employee works for you, they leave, they go and steal all your customers. Business calls me, hey, I want to go after this man or this woman. Well, what protections were in place, right? California is its public policy is against non-competes, right? They want to foster capitalism. They want to foster that competition. And so if you don't put measures in place, there's nothing against the law of you leaving a business and then going and taking your prior employers, or at least competing for your prior employer's customer. But you can put things in place. You need to speak with an attorney. Or, you got to have somebody that knows about protecting, for example, those customer lists, right? There's law on it. You can protect your customer lists, but you have to have the measures in place.
Is there any opinion? Do you have an opinion on the difference between getting an LLC, S corp for liability, or do you have an opinion on that?
For liability, it's pretty much the same. You're protected under the business entity. It varies on the type of business that you have. So as professionals, it doesn't protect against professional malpractice, right? But it protects other things. So you have to understand that. Don't think because you have a business entity, you're just protected. Most of the time, people deciding on whether to have a C corp, a corporation, an S corp, also a corporation, but it's under a different bracket, tax bracket as well, or an LLC. A lot of those choices are being made because they either own real estate or don't, or there's tax consequences. And so I always bring in a tax advisor on that. If they have a CPA or an accountant, that's fantastic. I'll bring them in so that we have a full understanding of their tax liabilities, and then we can decide what structure is best for them. It also has to do sometimes with partners, how many partners you're going to have. It also has to do with what kind of business you have. Some businesses, you can't have a corporation, like a straight corporation or a straight S corp, right? So there's legal limits, and then there's tax consequences, and then there's the business itself. How do you want the business to be structured? How do you want it to be run? Is it just a single business owner, or are you a giant law firm with 300 partners, right? Those are LLCs, and there's a reason for it.
Is there any legal considerations if somebody was going to sell or exit their business? Is there a lot?
Sure, there's a lot to that. You need to hire people to get into place, and I would not sell your business. If it's any decent size, I wouldn't sell a business without at least an attorney, if not a full legal team.
I know you work in California, but do you have any opinions on best place to have a business, the worst place to have a business? And then also, sometimes you see it pop up in videos, Delaware LLC, or, sometimes you see some of those things that people are doing to, protect their assets or do certain things business-wise. Do you have an opinion on any of that?
Sure. Delaware has certain benefits that they'll give. California has laws kind of minimize those benefits. So obviously, if you're doing business in the jurisdiction, right, I have never run into a problem where a corporation or a company incorporated in California, right, because they're a corporation in California. Like I said, Delaware is very business favorable for certain things, and so you might want to do that. Most businesses I deal with are incorporating in the jurisdiction that they're doing business in. Ultimately, even if you were a business in Delaware, you still have to register in California, right? So one of the things that used to happen over the years in California just passed a new law, but one of the things when people would create these business structures and they'd try to do multi-state or, and they're trying to hide the real owners, right? Nursing homes have done that, right? They're trying to hide who really owns. So if there is a lawsuit, unless the lawyer is diligent, maybe they're just going to one level. Well, if you get a $10 million judgment, it's unlikely that you're going to collect from just the local nursing home, let's say, or the local Toyota dealer, right? You need to run it up through the structure, run it up the tree, and figure out who owns what and where they own it. So a lot of times they'll use this shell game to do it. California has some laws in place now where they're requiring certain disclosures, which limit that. So I think as time moves forward, the benefit of incorporating out of state is less and less. But there are situations where certain jurisdictions are better than others. It's on a case-by-case basis. But most of the time, you pick the entity that's going to benefit you both from a structure, tax benefit, like I talked about, and then make sure you're running that appropriate. You can do it in California. I'd say most of the time that works for most people.
If somebody, based on your experience in business law, if somebody handed you a business right now with employees and things like that in California, obviously you'd set things up perfectly, but would you not want to do it based on what you've experienced? Because of, work comp stuff, different laws in place, maybe it's not as friendly as maybe Texas or Nevada or something like that.
Correct. Well, yeah, but it doesn't matter. You're still going to have to follow California law with your employees.
You're
right? You don't get to be in Texas. You don't get to register your business in Texas and follow Texas employment law, right? That's not the way it works, right? So
I was saying if somebody handed you a business in California, based on your experience, what are you shell-shocked because of the types of things that you handle as an attorney?
No, well, it depends on the business. If it's profitable, then I'll run it. But if you were handed a business, there's a process that businesses go through, and it's a due diligence process. So if you're selling a business to someone, the buyer should go through a due diligence process. If it's a large business, they may hire multiple accountants, multiple attorneys. They may have forensic accountants, right? They may have forensic economists, right? They're going to look at the business very carefully, and when they take over that business, hopefully through that due diligence process, they can either have the seller fix some of those things, similar to, say, real estate, right? Where you have disclosures and, hey, I want you to fix the roof before I buy it. And some of those things you can fix after you buy it, right? So I think if someone handed me a business, you want to look at the business first and foremost to see if it's going to be profitable. And then if you think that it's going to make sense for you to own it, I think you need to look at all the individual pieces. Some of those pieces you may be able to fix prior to the purchase, prior to closing. A lot of it you're probably going to fix after the closing. In all hopes, it's perfect when you get it. And it's just someone who doesn't want to run the business anymore, and you just kind of take over, count your blessings.
So you would just work through it, and yeah, I mean, you just do the due diligence.
I do the due diligence. If I was interested in buying the business, I would go through the due diligence process. I've had a couple of opportunities with law firms, right? And you have to go through the due diligence process to make sure that you're not jumping into a nightmare.
In terms of the fields that you are in and the cases that you handle, do you handle the entire state, or are you focusing on a specific region?
The entire state.
Okay.
I've had cases San Francisco, Sacramento, Fresno, Escondido, San Diego. Obviously, I'm out of Orange County, so a lot of my cases are in Orange County, San Bernardino, Riverside, LA County. But if someone needs help and they're in California and it makes sense to hire me, then I'll do it.
Yeah. These two topics are pretty complex, and we could talk for hours. Is there any like books, websites, resources that you would recommend for people if they wanted to go and learn about business law, elder abuse? Because a lot of information is out there, on social media and things like that. People are giving advice, but specifically what you guys do, is there anything that, I mean, we talked about looking into the homes, we talked about doing your due diligence on but if somebody want to educate themselves further, is there something does a state provide any sort of education on elder abuse, or does any sort of organization give updated advice on things?
There's organizations online, and there's many of them, right? You can go there and they'll actually give you advice. Like I said, if you just Googled, for example, a nursing home and put reviews or regulation or regulatory reviews, any type of Google search regarding, say, a skilled nursing facility, you'll come up. The state of California, right? They regulate these nursing homes. They go in and they do reviews in these nursing homes, right? And then those reviews are available online to some extent, right? And so you can see exactly what, for example, the state has thought about this particular nursing home over the last 5 years, 10 years, right? So I know it sounds a little odd, but I just start with Google, right? I don't know why the common person would want to educate themselves, say, on elder abuse, but if you go to some of these advocacy type websites, they're going to share with you exactly what I shared with you on elder abuse, which is you want to make sure that you're in there. You want to make sure you're using your eyes. You want to make sure you're advocating for your loved one. And hey, here's kind of the top 5 things to look for. Do they have bruising? And where did that come from, right? Are they having repeated falls, right? Are they going to the hospital with sepsis, which, right, is an inflammatory response to an infection. So is that happening? Are you there and they're very lethargic? You come in one day and they're responding and they're talking to you, and then the next day they're not, right? You need to pay attention to those things. So you can go on these websites and you can find out, some of the more common symptoms of neglect in the nurses. And with respect to business, it's the same thing. It depends. If you want to go on a business, you walk into, which people don't do nowadays, but you go into a bookstore or you go on Amazon, you can find thousands of books on, right, how to open a business, right? What do you want to look for to open a business? How to incorporate. And the first person, if you're going to incorporate, I would talk to is your tax advisor, right? You need to understand the tax implications of either purchasing business, selling a business, how you go about it, and when you set up your structure, what that's going to look like. So the tax advisor would be the first person I would go to if you're going to open up to make sure it meets your needs.
Yeah, a lot of times people will call us to do backgrounds after they've entered business contracts with people and things have happened. They're calling you and come to find out they've got a bunch of liens, judgments, and then court cases. So a lot of people may or may not realize that the court cases, like if you're involved in a court case with a home or something, that's going to be discoverable, and the court minutes and all of it. So they need to try to dig a little bit deeper if they're concerned.
If you have any hesitation whatsoever about your business partner, someone should hire someone like you, right? And do a full background search on this potential business partner, because you're absolutely right? They could be in debt to their ears. They could have felonies, right? They could be pretty bad actors, right? And so they could have judgments, like court judgments, and you want to know that. So if you have any question about somebody that you're going into business with, I recommend hiring a private investigator. I know I've actually referred people to you, right? Because you'll do that background search and you'll give them a good indication of who they're getting into business.
How do people get in touch with you? What's the best way? Website, phone?
I have a website. It's a basic website. Most of my business comes from referrals, so they can call me, right? It's my cell phone is 714-213-1548, right? It's on my website, right? And I take all my calls. And if they have something that they think they need help with, more than happy to help them.
One of the many things that stands out about you, and we've known each other for years, you really care about what you do. You take the time to talk to people. And there's so many attorneys out there that if they're not getting paid, they're not doing it. They're not answering the phone. I get a lot of calls from people that, whether they talk to you or talk to me, they're like, thank you so much, because they don't have the right, some people may not have that service mentality. Right. And I don't want people to bombard your voicemail, but you take the time, and whether you're getting retained, paid or not, hopefully you get the case. It's amazing, because this knowledge is so specific on these topics,
Right.
and it's so vast. And so, I just, first of all, I want to say thanks for coming here and sitting with me, and thanks for treating everybody I refer you like gold, because it's a rarity. So
Yeah, well, yeah, thank you. No, it's an honorable profession, and I think that sometimes lawyers lose track of that. And I'm proud to be a lawyer, right? And if I can help somebody with a brief phone call, fantastic. If I can help them because I take on a case, fantastic. But I think you have to have passion about what you do. And the problem with lawyers, and even myself, right? The problem with time is the only way we get paid is through time. So if I'm talking to someone for an hour, I'm not making money. And I think a lot of people don't understand that, because a lot of people will go to work, they'll go to a job, and they get a paycheck. If they took a little extra lunch, or they chatted with their neighbor, or they had a phone call with their family, their paycheck looks the same at the end of the month. If a lawyer has a conversation and he has too many conversations, right, the check looks a lot different at the end of the month. And I think that's what happens is attorneys, and rightfully so, they get frustrated of people trying to take advantage of their time. And I try to monitor that. But at the same time, I own the firm, right? And if I want to take a little extra time because someone needs help and I think I can help them, I'm willing to do that, right? And I try to keep it realistic. But you're right. I think people do need help. And a lot of times when I'm having those phone conversations, like you said, every once in a while you get a phone call where you're just helping someone out. That turns into business because they remember you. And then all of a sudden, 2 years down the road, they're like, oh, do you remember this person? I don't really remember that person. It was someone that I had a 30-minute conversation with, never got business from them. And they remembered, hey, Richard Ingle's going to take care of you. And he knows what he's talking about. Give him a call. And now all of a sudden I have a case that I'm litigating for 2 years. I more than made up for the 30-minute phone call that I had 2 years ago. Yep. And not only that, now I help 2 people instead of 1. Yeah. Right. So,
well, thanks again. And we're wrapping it up.
Thank you.